Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 3 of week 9 and this is continuation of lecture 1 and 2 and the topic of the lecture is the notion of ecological democracy. So before we go into the details of our lecture today, I will discuss in brief the concepts which will be covered. First, as we have already studied about the meaning of ecological democracy, its various elements, and what are the conditions which are required for the functioning of ecological democracy. So, to continue that discussion further, today we will talk about the notion of democracy with boundaries versus the notion of democracy without boundaries. Now, this understanding of democracy has important implications for the establishment of ecological democracy. And next, we will discuss some of the concerns of ecological democracy because we know that all the critical traditions, they have been engaging themselves with the various problems of social injustices, oppression, exploitation, and domination in the society. Similarly, the proponents of ecological democracy, they also have their own set of concerns, and actually we will discuss about those concerns in today's lecture. Then we know that in order to achieve the objectives of ecological protection, various initiatives have been taken at the local level, at the regional level, at the state level, and also at the international level. So we will have an understanding of these initiatives, but we will also see that there is a debate whether the global initiatives are more effective in the establishment of ecological democracy or the local initiatives or the initiatives by the individual, they are more successful in the attainment of the objectives. And the fourth, we will talk about a type of governance which is titled polycentric governance. We have heard about monocentric governance, where the governance or the governmental structures are localized at one level, where the actors are having all the powers and functions controlled in their hand. Whereas the opposite of monocentric governance is that where there are actually multiple centers of decision making. There are multiple centers of governance and therefore it has been termed as polycentric governance. Now, what implications monocentric governance or the alternative notion of the polycentric governance has for the establishment of ecological democracy? And we will understand this concept also in our today's lecture. So, first of all, we again understand the very important aspect of ecological democracy, which has been highlighted by John Trizac and about which we have already discussed in our previous lecture. And the statement which was given by him was that ecological democracy is a democracy without boundaries. Now, what we mean by that? Because the notion of democracy has been traditionally associated with a state or the boundaries of the state. And whenever we are talking about any type of democratic system, we are associating it with a particular state or the socio-economic circumstances which actually determine the functioning of democracy in a particular state. So, when we are talking about expanding the notion of democracy beyond the concept of nation state, then we have to understand it in terms of various dimensions. As we have already explained in our previous lecture, that it means that when we are talking about ecology, we have to extend our discussion beyond the scope of nation state to include within it the periphery of the ecosystem. We have to talk about the entire environment in which our state is placed or we are placed for that matter. Because we cannot have a narrow perspective, and with the help of that narrow perspective, we cannot analyze something which is having a very expansive dimension. So our approach also has to be expansive in nature. It has also to be broader in nature. And the second important thing is that all the ecological issues and problems, they are global in nature. They are not localized to any particular region or state. For example, the problem of climate change is faced not only by the people of India, but also people who are living in America or for that matter, any part of the world. The problem of drought, then the problem of flooding is being faced by people across multifarious countries in the world. So, the extension of ecological problem is global in nature. And if we try to find solutions to those problems in terms of state-centric perspective, then naturally it will create problems and it will not help us in finding right solution or proper solution or comprehensive solutions to the problem. But you know that on any concept or theory in the field of social sciences, there is no consensus. So on this point also we find that there are differences of opinion. Some scholars have argued that no, democracy cannot be without boundaries because certain boundaries are essential for safeguarding the functioning of democracy, and they are essential for democracy and especially for ecological democracy. And two important instances of such boundaries have been: first is environmental rights and second is ecological limits. Now, what are environmental rights? Environmental rights, which are rights associated with the aspects of environment. It can be rights of the Mother Earth, it can be right to natural resources or the protection of natural resources. And these environmental rights are so important, and especially you know that yes, some of these rights are so important that they cannot be compromised because they are essential for our own survival. So they can be placed above the common process of amendment, which are generally a very important feature of any democratic system. So by placing certain rights above the normal procedure of the amendment process can be termed as undemocratic in nature. But you know that these rights are essential and they cannot be amended by anybody easily. So therefore, it has been said that they pose a challenge to the basic norms and precepts of democracy. But two important scholars, one is Walter F. Baber and second is Robert V. Bartlett. We have already studied about them in brief in our earlier lectures. They have argued that environmental rights can also enhance our democratic debates. Now, this is, totally in contradiction to what we have been studying till now. Baber and Bartlett, they argue that there is an emerging consensus in the society over three areas of rights. Because you know that certain rights, I have already mentioned, they are very important for not only our subsistence, but also they are very important for exercise of our basic rights. And over some of these rights, there have been a type of consensus or agreement amongst people in the society across the world. And this has been done or this has been arrived at by democratic process, because the consensus is not authoritarian. Consensus is based on mutual will and agreement. So therefore, if we have a look at those rights, then Weber and Bartlett have identified three such rights. One is right to access information and decision making. Second is right to food and water. Third is right to environmental security. When we talk about right to access information and decision making, you can say that this right is also an important aspect of the traditional notion of democracy. Then why should we have this right, or why should we actually talk about this right again? because it is already a part of democracy. Yes, it is very much true. But you know that this right is not so easily available in the real sense of the term or in practice in everyday lives. Because right to access information involves not only right to all types of information, free information, but also right to correct information. Because if you do not have right to correct information, then you may be misled. You cannot actually take proper decisions, and you may be befooled by some people in the society. And in the age of social media, we know that the impact of fake news on our decision making processes is tremendous and alarming in nature. So, we not only need the right to information, but we also need the right to fair and correct information. These are the essential elements of not only traditional democracy but also the ecological democracy. Because in the case of ecological democracy, when we are making environmental decision making, we have to ensure that we are providing information about our all decisions to the common public, especially those whose interests are affected or who are the stakeholders. So therefore, information is very, very important, and you know that information is empowerment in the today's knowledge society. Similarly, right to decision making. This is also a very, very important feature of the traditional notion of democracy. And this is also an important feature of ecological democracy, because I have already discussed quite a number of times earlier that in today's world, the meaning of democracy has been reduced only to holding elections and participation in the voting process. Yes, these are one of the important elements of democracy, but these are not the whole sole elements of democratic process. Because the word democracy, it involves not simply voting and participating in the election process, but it also involves contesting the election, having the opportunity and potentiality to win election and participate in the government making process or acquire the political leadership position. And more than that, it also involves how much influence, how much role, how much potentialities or capabilities we are having in influencing the decision making processes. Are we able to change the decisions of the government, or are we being consulted when certain decisions which affect the environment or ecosystem in which we are living? So these are some of the fundamental questions which are being addressed by the proponents of ecological democracy, and therefore they say that on these rights there is almost a consensus. Then right to food and water. We all know that these are the basic subsistence rights. Without them, our existence is impossible. They are required for our survival. So there will be no society who will actually disagree on the importance of these basic necessities of life. So these are the important rights, or you can say the subsistence rights over which there is a consensus. And it is better to have a right for these, basic elements, because they help us in making the safeguards more permanent and long lasting. And the third is right to environmental security, because we all are thriving and living in an environment. We derive our sustenance from environment. Our life and our entire well-being is dependent on environment. So there is need of security. And this security is more essential for those sections of the community who are poor, who are under marginalized, who are, for example, women, tribals, or belonging to a particular caste groups or ethnic groups. They can be anybody who are at the lowest rung of the ladder in the society, they needs to be protected. Because we have heard about green imperialism in our earlier lecture, how the resources have been grabbed by the rich and the influential in the society, how that has led to violation of rights of those who are at the lowest rung of the society. So, explaining further, the scholars have argued that like human rights, there are environmental rights which are important and cannot be seen in isolation. So, human rights are rights of the human, we all know, and there cannot be any contradiction, because ultimately environment is needed for the sustenance and for protecting the well-being of human beings. So, there cannot be any contradiction, neither they should be seen in isolation. They complement and supplement each other. Human rights are anthropocentric in nature, but environmental rights can extend these rights to non-humans as well. So basically, we are talking about extending or expanding the scope of human rights. Yes, the word human in the term human rights, it can denote an anthropocentric perspective, which means that any perspective or approach which is centered on human beings. And we know that our entire social, political, economic philosophy revolves around human beings and its development. But it does not mean that we cannot go beyond this approach. When we are talking about environmental rights, we can extend these rights, which are now only limited to human beings, to other non-human entities, and we have already done it. We are talking about animal rights, we are talking about rights of the Mother Earth, etc. Now, we have already discussed in some detail the first boundary, which was the environmental rights, and how a minimum level of consensus has helped in strengthening the processes of democracy. Now, the second boundary is the ecological limits. Now, scholars have argued that ecological limits can unduly restrict the citizens' freedom to choose amongst different objectives. For example, pursuit of a particular model of economic development. Now, what does this mean? For that, we have to first understand what we mean by ecological limits. Ecological limit means understanding that there is a limit to which we can use and extract our ecosystem. There is a limit to human growth, and there is a limit to grab the resources for our own development. When we understand that there is nothing in this world which is infinite, then we understand that we have to restrict our wants and desires, and we have to rethink our models of development. So when we are doing this, then naturally we have to restrict individuals' choices or individual right to make choices, and as I have mentioned, individual right to choose a particular model of development. So that if we impose such restriction on individual choices and freedom, it may lead to undermining of democratic ideals or democratic norms. And instead of giving importance to the democratic procedures, it may give more priority to the environmental concerns or environmental issues. Yes, it is true. But they are not antagonistic. It may appear that they are on the two sides of the pole, but in reality it is not so. The concept of ecological limits can be very well combined with democracy, but from a different perspective. It has to be understood from a different perspective. And that different perspective has been well understood through the concept of planetary boundaries. Now, this planetary boundaries is actually talking of not the boundaries of the state, but talking in terms of boundaries of the planet, which is a much expansive vision of our space. So, we have to elaborate or expand our understanding of space also, of our geographical vision also. And if we expand this vision, then only we will be able to incorporate all other elements besides the human element in our understanding of ecological democracy. And this can be done by a sort of debate which is inclusive in nature. This can be done by the process of deliberation, about which we have already discussed in some detail in our previous lecture. Because deliberation is an important part of democracy, and more so in the case of ecological democracy. Because only by including all the stakeholders and the citizens in the process of deliberation can a mutual consensus be developed over any issue. Now, this planetary boundary, it is useful concept because it can incorporate both anthropocentric and ecocentric perspective at the same time. As I have already said, that ecological democracy believes in synthesis. Ecological democracy believes in symbiosis. It does not believe in having a fragmented approach towards life. It talks about a synthetic and integral approach, a comprehensive approach towards the environment or towards the system. So, therefore, it can promote an anthropocentric approach, which is, it is already in line with the conventional thinking, where we can create a safe ecosystem for human beings. So, within the planetary boundaries, we can create a safe ecosystem for the human beings, which is already there. We are again emphasizing it in the context of ecological democracy. And through an ecocentric approach, we can extend this safe space to include non-human world also. So, it is not that we are making some sacrifices, we are simply extending our space to include others also. So, it is an inclusive approach. So, after understanding the meaning and the usefulness of planetary boundaries for incorporating or synthesizing the anthropocentric and ecocentric perspective, now we see some of the concerns or issues which have come before the ecological democrats. First, the territorial boundaries of the state, they do not coincide with the geographical distribution of the ecosystem. Now, this we have already said that when we are talking about ecosystem, ecosystem is a very broad term or it is a very broad system. It comprises the animate world, the inanimate world, and therefore you cannot just talk about the ecosystem with a state-centric perspective. We need a broader perspective, and ecological democracy provides that broader perspective. It asks us to move beyond the state-centric perspective. So therefore, it is not only a blessing, but it is also a challenge before the ecological democrats, because now they have to go beyond the conventional mode of thinking and develop processes and mechanisms to understand the vast geographical distribution of ecosystem. And the second important problem, which we have already discussed quite a couple of times earlier, is that the nature of the environmental problems which have actually emerged in the recent times, they are global in nature. How to tackle these problems with a state-centric approach? So therefore, these are two very important dimensions or challenges or concerns which have come before the scholars of the ecological democracy. For example, I have already mentioned that the effects of climate change is experienced not only by the people of Western countries, but also the non-Western countries. The effects of climate change in the form of flooding, in the form of drought, in the form of heat waves, in the form of global warming or rise in temperature, it is experienced by people in both Europe and also across the South Asia. The air pollution and the reduction in water level is a rising problem across the world. We are facing severe water crisis not only in India but across the world. So all these problems, they are not state-centered or located within a particular boundaries. They are spread across the world. And moreover, the consequences of environmental degradation is faced by somebody, and the doer of those environmental degradation has been somebody else. So this is also another important challenge which the scholars of the ecological democracy are actually grappling with. Hence, the challenge is, if the affected people are spread across states, then how to involve them in decision making, which is an essential element of ecological democracy because the population of the world is so large. How can we involve so many people in the process of decision making? Because even at the national level, it is not possible to involve each and everybody in the process of decision making. At the global level, how can this be done? So, in response to this, a wide variety of intergovernmental institutions, private party initiatives, and social movement organizations have evolved at transnational level that provides opportunities for involving multiple stakeholders in environmental decision making. So, as I have already said, that there are a couple of initiatives which have actually been taken whether by the United Nations or by the various regional bodies and also by the state level initiatives and also the grassroots movements at the local level. So, they have played a very important role. In fact, they are a set of intergovernmental institutions. Also, the role of the civil society, various private organizations, various private bodies, and they are playing an important role at transnational level and providing opportunity for involving multiple stakeholders in environmental decision making. And this is a very important thing because because UNDP has been doing a social and environmental audit of the projects which they are funding. And in that they try to find out what impact the people they face in terms of those development projects and make a continuous assessment of that. So, these initiatives are very important and we will study in some detail in the subsequent lectures that what initiatives have been taken at the governmental level, at the transnational level to address these problems. Now, this is in addition to the involvement of people in the collective decision making at the national level, at the local levels, and also their involvement in various movements. So, you can see that there is a combination of efforts at multiple levels which are trying or striving towards the protection of environment or ecological concerns in their own way by following their own means and methods. Now, this has given rise to another debate because you know that in social sciences there is very less agreement over any issue or any concept. Now, there has been a debate whether the local and regional initiatives are more successful in addressing the problem of ecological concern or whether the efforts made by the world bodies like United Nations or the regional bodies have played a more effective role in solving ecological problems. Now, there is a difference of opinion. Some believe that local initiatives are more important, while on the other, there are people who believe that no, the local people's initiatives, they cannot be successful because they have less access to resources, they have less influence and their horizon of activity is also very limited. They can only talk about a particular small aspect of their area, but the nature of ecological problems are global in nature. So, they have to be addressed at the global level. Moreover, the states have the resources, they have the will and they have all the infrastructural facilities to ensure the environmental protection. So, there is a difference of opinion and there is a division between the scholars also regarding at which level the measures for environmental protection are more successful. Further, global environmental governance may ignore diversities across society and thus can be termed as undemocratic. So, another aspect of the debate is if we give importance to the global governance, then we can have a universal set of principles which will be applied across all the states. But we know that the problems of ecological concern, they widely differ or they are different across different societies and therefore they need entirely different set of solutions. So, if we ignore the diversities and impose one single solution for all the problems, then it will be highly undemocratic and unsuccessful in nature. Similarly, at the national level also, we cannot have a single solution for all the problems. Every area, they have their different demographic characteristics, they have entirely different set of geographical conditions. Therefore, we cannot have a single solution even at the national level. So, how can we have a single solution for the international level? But global perspective can be aligned with national or local level perspective through polycentric levels of governance. But the need of the hour is that we need both. We need both the global level governance, we need also the local level governance. So, how to combine this? Because until and unless we do not combine this, we cannot build an effective solution for ecological protection. And the solution lies in adopting polycentric type of governance. Now, what is polycentric levels of governance? Polycentric governance consists of multiple levels of governance and actors. So, we have already have a brief idea of monocentric governance, where the governance is centered only at one place, whereas the polycentric governance is where the governance is scattered or split across multiple levels, where there are multiple actors of decision making, so that there is no concentration of power, or there can be more inclusivity and there can be more participation of different stakeholders in the process of environmental decision making. Now, a very noted scholar has rightly said, and his name is S. Namier. He has argued that how the ecological reflexivity in the public sphere can be enhanced by deliberative citizen forum through a system of nested polycentrism. Now, he has given another related concept, but adding a word, adjective, nested, to the polycentrism word. Now, what he said? He has actually talked about three important things. One is the deliberative citizens forum. Second is the importance of ecological discussion in the public sphere. And third is a system of nested polycentrism. Now, if you go into the definition and meaning of polycentrism, then what is that? We have already seen the meaning of polycentrism is the diffusion of governance across multiple levels in the society. Nested means these multiple decision making centers and units, they overlap and nest within each other. That means they are not in a hierarchical relations with each other. They are not in the form of a pyramid, where one is placed at the top of others giving orders and commands, and those who are at the bottom, they are simply passively obeying it. Instead of that, we are having a structure which is like a nested relationship. And this nested relationship is non-hierarchical in nature. It is not having the shape of a pyramid, but it is based on a certain sense of equality. It is integral in nature. It acknowledges the dignity of each level or each centers of governance. So, therefore, by having a multiple centers of power and all these centers are nested, that means it has another meaning. They are not fragmented, they are not separated from each other, but they are very much interconnected with each other. And when we say that they are interconnected with each other, it means that they are in a relationship of symbiosis. So, therefore, this concept is very important for understanding the important functional needs which are essential for the establishment of ecological democracy. So, with that, I come to the end of the lecture, followed by a series of activity questions where I have asked a couple of questions based on the topics which have been covered in today's lecture, like how boundaries are necessary for safeguarding ecological democracy, explain the challenges before ecological democrats, what is polycentric approach, why is it needed in environmental governance. These activity questions are followed by certain statements and questions which are aimed at steering your imagination. Can you think of some local initiatives which are taken by farmers at the rural level which are aimed at preservation of environment. You can visit a village and you can interview a farmer and get all the information regards the initiative which they are taking. What do you understand or what do you think are the advantages of polycentric governance? Can you think of some reasons why right to information is essential for environmental decision making? So with that, I come to the end of this lecture. I hope you have enjoyed it and thank you very much.